Faults and the San Andreas Fault by Nolan d'Abruzzi. Throughout the duration of this presentation you will learn what a fault is and the most common types of faults, the fault type and characteristics of the San Andreas Fault, history of the San Andreas Fault, and the dangers of the San Andreas Fault. Faults and various types of faults. A fault is defined as a crack in the Earth's crust. Faults are typically associated with or form the boundaries between Earth's tectonic plates. Faults can vary in length, some with lengths totaling just a few millimeters, and others with lengths totaling thousands of kilometers. There are both active faults and inactive faults. For a fault to be considered an active fault, the pieces of the Earth's crust along the fault will show movement over time. This movement may occur rapidly in the form of an earthquake, or may occur slowly in the form of creep. Inactive faults, on the other hand, are faults that have experienced movement of the Earth's crust along them at one time, but no longer experience the movement. Most faults, however, produce repeated displacements over geologic time. Geologists use the movement of a fault to determine the fault type. Common types of faults include normal and reverse faults, which are both considered dip-slip faults, as well as strike-slip faults, which can be classified as either a right lateral strike-slip fault or a left lateral strike-slip fault. Faults that move along the direction of the dip plane, meaning that they move up or down, are known as dip-slip faults and are described as either normal or reverse faults. Normal faults occur in areas where rocks are pulling apart. This is referred to as tensile forces. This allows rocky crust of an area to take up more space. In a normal fault, the rock on one side of the fault moves down relative to the rock on the other side of the fault. Normal faults will not produce an overhanging rock ledge. In fact, in most normal faults you could walk on an exposed area of the fault. Normal faulting is often observed in the western United States Basin and Range Province, as well as along oceanic ridge systems. Reverse faults, the opposite of normal faults, occur in areas where rocks are pushed together. This is referred to as compression forces. Reverse faults allow for the rocky crust of an area to take up less space. In a reverse fault, the rock on one side of the fault is pushed up relative to the rock on the other side of the fault. The exposed area of a reverse fault is often an overhang, and unlike normal faults, you cannot walk on it. This type of faulting often occurs in areas where one plate is being subducted under another, as in Japan. Strike-slip faults are very different from dip-slip faults. Strike-slip faults move on a horizontal plane, and as mentioned earlier, strike-slip faults are classified as either right lateral or left lateral. To further break it down, in a strike-slip fault, the block of rock on one side of the fault moves one direction, and the block of rock on the other side of the fault moves in the other direction. Strike-slip faults do not make cliffs, as the block of rocks are moving horizontally as opposed to vertically. For a fault to be a left lateral strike-slip fault, the displacement of the far block will be to the left when viewing from either side of the fault, and for a fault to be a right lateral strike-slip fault, the displacement of the far block will be to the right when viewing from either side of the fault. The most common example of a strike-slip fault, as well as the focus of the remainder of this video, is the San Andreas Fault. About the San Andreas Fault. Characteristics of the San Andreas. The San Andreas Fault is one of the longest faults in North America, with a length of over 800 miles and a maximum depth of at least 10 miles within the Earth. As mentioned earlier, the San Andreas is a strike-slip fault and is located in western California, forming the boundary between the North American plate and the Pacific plate. Specifically, it is classified as a right lateral strike-slip fault,
meaning that the Pacific Plate actually moves northwestward relative to the North American Plate, and the North American Plate moves southeastward relative to the Pacific Plate. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, surveying shows a drift at the rate of as much as 2 inches per year. The San Andreas Fault is referred to as the master fault of several other faults that form a sort of network cutting through the rocks of the California coastal region. Extending from northern California southward to Cajun Pass, the San Andreas forms a continuous break in the Earth's crust. However, several branching faults share the movement of plates southeastward from Cajun Pass.